In the waning years of the 31st millennium, the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. The light of the Astronomicon, once the beacon that guided humanity across the void, flickered under the weight of treachery. And above the cradle of mankind, Terra, Earth, the birthplace of the Imperium, the dark shadow of the War Master loomed. This is the Siege of Terra, and it began not with a roar, but with a silence, a stillness in the void, and then the arrival of the traitor fleet. From the farthest reaches of the Sol system, they came, a black tide of twisted starships and corrupted voidcraft, a vast fleet, bound together by a singular will, the will of Horus Lupercal, War Master turned arch-traitor, once the Emperor's favored son, now his darkest enemy. The sons of Horus led the vanguard, their armor a tarnished green, their icon once a proud wolf's head, now a snarling beast devouring stars. Behind them came the World Eaters, the Death Guard, the Emperor's children, all transformed, all monstrous, all hungry for Terra's fall. And deep within the bowels of the War Master's flagship, the vengeful spirit, Horus himself prepared for the final gambit. No longer fully mortal, no longer fully sane, the ruinous powers had shaped him into something else, something godlike. That on Terra, the defenders stood ready, or as ready as they could be. The skies were aflame with the last remnants of the Loyalist fleet, shattered in the void above Luna. The walls of the Imperial Palace, once symbols of unity and ambition, now bristled with weaponry, reinforced against apocalypse. Rogal Dorn, pre-march of the Imperial Fists, had shaped those defenses with tireless obsession. He paced the battlements, his golden armor dulled with the dust of unrelenting labor. To Dorn, this was more than a siege. It was a reckoning. Beside him, the Custodian Guard, golden giants, each a demigod in their own right, prepared for war. They were the Emperor's personal blade, his will incarnate. Silent, unyielding. Then, after long hours of stillness, the void screamed. The bombardment began. The outer ring of orbital defense platforms was reduced to molten fragments within minutes. The sky above Terra turned red as firestorms raged in low orbit. The traitor legions descended like a tide of black blood, their drop pods burning through the atmosphere like falling stars. Istvan, Kulth, Prospero, all had been preludes to this final act. Now, the siege had begun. The outer bastions fell first. Outposts turned to ash beneath demon engines and traitor titans. Yet the palace walls, kilometers thick and woven with ancient technologies, held firm. The Saturnine Gate, the Eternity Wall, the Lion's Gate spaceport, each a bastion unto itself, and behind each stood warriors who would not yield. Imperial fists manned the gun batteries with grim precision, their bolters roaring like thunder across the parapets. Custodians moved like golden wraiths among the shadows, cutting down war bands of corrupted Astartes with silent fury. From the broken streets of the outer districts, civilian militias and Terran PDF gave their lives in droves, mere mortals standing against the gods. Within the vengeful spirit, Horus watched the siege unfold. He saw the chaos, the blood, the defiance. But he felt no rage, only inevitability. This was the moment he had been reforged for, the triumph he had promised to the dark gods. And somewhere within what remained of his soul, a flicker of something else, regret, perhaps, stirred. But it was buried beneath centuries of ambition and the whispering lies of the warp. He would take Terra. He would break the Emperor. He would become the new god of mankind. The siege of Terra dragged on, measured not in days, but in blood. For every hour that passed, 100 lives were extinguished, and still the defenders held. The outer bastions had crumbled beneath traitor fire. The traitor Astartes had breached the outer defenses in places, pouring into the ravaged districts like a tide of iron and hate. But the heart of the palace, the Sanctum Imperialis, still stood inviolate, and before it, the Lion's Gate spaceport became the graveyard of titans. Rogal Dorn walked the walls, tireless and sleepless. His armor was gold, yet dulled by soot and battle grime. His fists, carved from ceramite and vengeance, clenched with restrained fury. He had been the Emperor's architect, the builder of fortresses, but now he was their final defender. He mourned in silence. For every breach, for every bastion lost. Not in tears, but in stubbornness. He would not yield. Not 1 inch more. Not while breath remained. When asked why he did not rest, Dorn would only reply, "If I sleep, Terra sleeps. And if Terra sleeps, we die in our dreams." Within the corridors behind the lines, the Adeptus Custodes moved like golden ghosts. They were few, their numbers thinned in battles stretching back to Prospero, to the webway war beneath the palace. Each custodian was worth 100 space marines in skill, in strength, in will. Yet even gods can bleed. The enemy had brought demons. Realms of unreality bled into the underhalls. One custodian, a monteur, fought through 6 hours of warp-twisted corridors, alone, hunted by a creature that wore his own face. He emerged, bloodied, one arm shattered, whispering only, "It knew my thoughts." The price of defending the throne was more than death. It was unmaking. In the no-man's land beyond the eternity wall, the sons of Horus advanced. No longer the Luna wolves, no longer noble. Their armor, once gray and proud, had become corroded green, marked with sigils that bled shadow. They fought with savagery, not for conquest, but for witness. Garviel Loken, once their brother, would not have recognized them. The just Aaron, Horus's elite, led the charge through the ruins. Abaddon, first captain, roared defiance at the palace walls. He believed he fought for the future of mankind, but his acts said otherwise. To stand before a son of Horus now was to stare into madness wrapped in iron. It was not only flesh that assaulted Terra. The warp itself found cracks, tiny tears in reality, pulled open by sorcery and suffering. 1,000 rituals burned on 1,000 altars. From these rents came things with too many eyes, too many voices. The walls of the imperial dungeon wept blood. One section of the vaults beneath the Eternity Gate fell to a horde of whispering beasts. A company of custodes descended into the dark, sealing the breach with their own lives. Not one returned, but the gate held. Even in silence, the throne world cried out. On a storm-swept balcony overlooking the devastation, Rogal Dorn stood alone. Behind him, the sky burned. Before him, Terra died by inches. He looked toward the imperial palace's heart, the throne room, where the emperor remained, unmoving, ever distant. Dorn had spoken to him only once since the siege began, and the emperor had said only this: "You must hold the line. Nothing else matters." There was no warmth. No farewell, just purpose. That was the emperor's gift and his curse. And then there was light. From the storm clouds above came the angel. Sanguinius, pre-march of the blood angels, descended upon the Lion's Gate spaceport like a star fallen to earth. His wings spread wide, his sword bathed in radiance. Behind him, the remnants of his legion, bloodied from the Cygnus cluster, charged into the fray with renewed fury. To the defenders, it was as if salvation had taken flight. Even Dorn allowed himself a moment of belief. But the angel carried sorrow with him. In his dreams, he had already seen the end. And aboard the vengeful spirit, Horus smiled. He had lowered the shields of his ship, a trap, a challenge, an invitation. He wanted the emperor to come, to end this not with armies, but with gods. The board was set. The pawns had fallen. Now, only kings and angels remained. The siege had reached its end. The walls had not fallen, but the defenders could no longer hold them forever. Terra bled. The palace was shattered. Its corridors, sanctified by eons of worship, were choked with corpses. And above them all, suspended in the void like a waiting executioner, the vengeful spirit watched. Then, as planned, Horus dropped the shields. The emperor of mankind, seated upon the golden throne, had watched the siege in silence. His will held back the tides of the warp. His mind fought battles across infinite planes. But when the vengeful spirit opened its defenses, he stirred. He did not speak much. He did not explain. He simply stood, surrounded by his remaining custodians, a few surviving companions, and his most loyal sons. Malcador the Sigillite, broken from the strain of maintaining the Great Ward, watched him leave and knew that he would never see his friend again. With Sanguinius and Dorn at his side, the Emperor stepped aboard the teleportarium and vanished in a flare of golden light. They arrived not in a warship, but in a hell. The interior of Horus's flagship no longer obeyed the laws of man or machine. Its hulls twisted, gravity bent. The ship bled, its metal walls pulsing with warp-born life. The gods of chaos had claimed it as their temple. Sanguinius flew ahead, his senses drawn by something deeper, something calling to him. The Emperor and Dorn followed, cutting down demonic forms and traitor remnants, their blades leaving arcs of pure light in the darkness. But the warp cheats. The labyrinth split them apart. Dorn was lost first, flung into a shadow realm of flickering memory. The custodians were pulled into endless battle. And soon, only the angel remained. Sanguinius found Horus in the heart of the vengeful spirit. But the being he faced was no longer his brother. Horus was colossal, clad in baroque armor wreathed in screaming sigils. His face was both man and god, twisted by ruin. And yet, beneath the corruption, Sanguinius saw the brother he once loved. They did not speak much. The room trembled with the presence of the gods. And then, they fought. Blade met claw. Wings beat against iron. The angel was fast, faster than light, a blur of white and red, but Horus was might incarnate. He had been chosen, elevated, shaped for this moment. The battle shook the deck. But in the end, fate was sealed long ago. Horus broke Sanguinius's blade. He crushed his ribs. And then, with a howl that echoed across the immaterium, he shattered the angel's body against the steel. When it was done, Horus looked down at what remained, and for a moment he wept. The Emperor entered the chamber in silence. Before him lay Sanguinius, his brightest son, broken, and before him stood Horus, his most beloved, lost. They faced one another, not as father and son, but as gods of opposing truths. Around them, the warp howled. The chaos gods watched with bated breath. And without a word, they clashed that it was not a duel of blades alone. It was will against will, creation against unmaking. The Emperor struck with the fury of the sun, his sword a golden beam of pure psychic light. Horus countered with warp-forged claws that tore through matter and soul alike. Galaxies flared behind every blow. The ship trembled. Time cracked. For a moment, Horus gained the upper hand. He wounded the Emperor grievously, tearing through his armor, slashing through his chest. The gods screamed in ecstasy. The Emperor fell to one knee, bleeding golden fire. And then something changed. In that moment, Horus hesitated. The mask slipped. A flicker of the old War Master, the sun, returned. He looked down at the Emperor, and in his eyes, the gods saw weakness. The Emperor saw it too, and in that instant, he unleashed his full power. All of it. There was no anger, no hate, only sorrow and resolve. What followed cannot be fully known. But when it ended, Horus was gone, not slain, not vanquished, erased. The soul behind the corruption had been burned away. Nothing remained. Not even the gods could salvage him. The Emperor collapsed beside the body of his son. What strength remained was fading. His form, once radiant, now trembled. His vision dimmed. Rogal Dorn found him there, in the ruin, with the angel's body at his side and Horus's death echoing through the warp. Dorn cried out. The Emperor could not answer. There was no victory, only necessity. The Emperor was returned to Terra, broken, nearly dead. His body placed upon the golden throne, where he remained still. The Imperium was saved, but not as a paradise. It became a tomb, a fortress, a graveyard, a prison of faith and flame. The dream had died, but the lie endured. Sanguinius was buried in stasis. Rogal Dorn mourned in silence. The custodians became wraiths in golden halls, and the galaxy turned, uncaring, as new wars were born. Thus ended the Horus Heresy, not with triumph, but with tragedy. Now, 10,000 years later, Terra still stands, a world locked in eternal vigilance. The Emperor's throne still burns, and across the stars, his name is whispered as both salvation and curse. But in the stillness of the void, the shadows stir again, and somewhere, the echo of Horus's fall still weeps across the warp.